Bonjour à tous, on va commencer sans plus tarder, en espérant que les retardataires arriveront en cours de route. Donc merci à tous d'être présents aujourd'hui pour ce presque premier temps des rendez-vous pro de Scopitone, enfin des rendez-vous du labo de Scopitone, cette édition 2018. Donc aujourd'hui c'est une journée qui va être plutôt consacrée à des conférences comme celle de Henke ce matin et à des tables rondes cet après-midi, donc on aura sans doute l'occasion de se recroiser dans la journée. Un petit mot rapidement sur le déroulé de cette matinée, avant de laisser la parole à Robert. Cette conférence va durer à peu près 1 heure. On aura un petit temps de questions à la fin, donc je vous inviterai à garder vos questions pour la fin. Elle sera enregistrée aussi, donc vous pourrez la revoir éventuellement sur le site de Stéréolus dans les semaines qui suivent. Voilà. So let's switch to English and welcome Robert Henke. So thank you, Robert, for being here today. We are very pleased to have you with us here. And
okay, let's first try it works without microphone, because I always find it strange to talk through a microphone. It's like I'm shouting at you. Can you hear me today? Ok, bon. Mon français est une grande catastrophe, and I can say polite things, and I can ask for the subway, and that's it. So I have to do it in English. But if you have questions, just interrupt me. I'd like to talk a little bit about how I came to do what I do and what are the general things I'm interested in. And afterwards, I'd like to talk mostly about my installations and my laser works, since I'm presenting a laser piece here. So, if you look at this, this is very clear. This is a piece of art. This is a painting. It's hanging in a museum. It's famous. There's no question about its nature. This has no function. You can't cook with it. You can't, well, actually you could if you cut it down, but you shouldn't. It's very clear that this is, per definition, something that is considered art. And the person who made it, therefore, by definition, is an artist. This here is a computer. It's a PDP-8 from, I'm not sure, the early 70s, I believe. And so this is clearly not a piece of art. This is clearly a piece of engineering. But if you look at this, you will see a lot of things that someone decided not only because of function. Someone also had an artistic mindset here, because someone made a decision that this font has to be used and that this font has to be centered. Someone made a decision about the color of the switches. Someone made a decision about the lines here and the arrangement of things and this symmetry. So if you have no idea that this is a computer, and I just tell you this is a sculpture, and the person who made it is an artist, you would agree. Only the fact that we know it's not a piece of art gives us this notion that it's not a piece of art. But the interesting thing, and I come from a family of engineers, so I come from a family where no one was an artist, and where it was all about making such things. And I was very early on interested in abstract painting and in sculpture, and I had this feeling that something is connected between this one and the picture I showed you before. And I couldn't really figure it out for myself until I discovered electronic music. And suddenly I noticed there is a very strong connection between technology and engineering and art. And only later I understood that there's a lot of principles that you can apply to both. When you want to be successful as an artist, you have to understand your tools, you have to understand your materials, your machinery. So in a certain way, you have to have an engineering mindset. You need to understand, if you take photos, you need to understand optics. If you paint, you need to understand the properties of your colors, their behavior over time, how they mix. And if you make music, you think about concepts of time, of metron, of harmonic relationships, which is all very close to mathematics. And if you work with computers for doing art, then obviously you occupy yourself with a lot of technical stuff. And it is not a surprise that when we talk about machinery like this, we talk about elegance. So there is the idea of elegance in code. There's the idea of elegance in hardware design. We find an elegant solution, which means you find a solution that is very simple, very efficient, and does exactly what you want. And in a way, a good piece of art very often is defined by a similar concept of elegance. It's not arbitrary. There is a reason for everything which is there. So it's not, okay, let's make it red here because it's red. Probably there's a reason for the fact that something is red. And the artist might be able either to explain it to you, or if the artist has done it in a very intuitive way, you could still apply some art historic context or some context of proportion, all those kinds of things, to find an explanation for these things too. And let's see, right? As someone who started making electronic music and who never considered to be a visual artist, I was still occupied with a lot of visual aspects of my work, simply because I needed to develop interfaces. An interface is something that allows me to interact with my software. And if I do things that are really complex to understand, it is very important to have an interface that shows you what goes on. So this here is an interesting example. This is an interface I wrote only for the purpose of understanding what goes on. There was, at the beginning of this, there was no artistic, visual idea, concept behind it whatsoever. This is 96 loudspeakers in a ring, and this is sound sources that move. And they have numbers, and they have colors, and unfortunately, I'm not sure if I find the video. I didn't prepare that. It could be somewhere on video. Anyway, we will see later, because I have a lot of things I want to talk about. And anyway, so I made this thing purely for the reason of, yeah, I don't know where this super high-pitched sound comes from. I hope it's not from me, because it's annoying. It's not me, that's for sure. Oh, it's not me, but it's the mixing desk. It's so much nicer outside. So I made this for the purpose of understanding what's going on, because at the position where I'm sitting when I work on these pieces, I couldn't really, I was not sitting here in the middle. So in order to understand what my software does, I needed to look at the visual representation. And afterwards, I noticed that this, especially if it's moving, actually is really nice to watch. And it's pleasing, and there's an interesting visual aspect to it. And you could basically sell this as an audiovisual piece. This is another example. I wrote a sequencer which allowed me back in 2000, not sure, 2002 or something like this, to collaborate online with an artist colleague of mine from Montreal. And we projected this behind us on stage so that people could understand what's going on. And again, this was purely driven by the necessity to show some data, and it was not informed at all by the idea to do something artistic. But in a later version, I made, during the process, some nice little coding mistakes. So I got some numbers wrong, and suddenly things looked like that. And moving still. And these are still buttons you can click, they're just completely broken, visually. And of course, as someone who is interested in abstract paintings and stuff like this, I look at this, which just emerges due to my stupidity, and I think, wow, this is quite beautiful. And so, step by step, I gained a desire and an understanding that I could do something else than just focus on sound. And I I remembered more or less that I was always interested in the visual world and in the art world, in sculpture, in painting, in all those kinds of things. It just never occurred to me that I myself could do it, which is strange, of course, because from your perspective, I'm one of those known artists in a certain field. Why should I ever doubt that I can do something? Well, that's how it is sometimes. It took me very long to accept the fact that I'm actually making a living mostly from making music, because it was never something that was taught to me that this could be an option. And the same thing went on when I decided at some point that I like to work actively in the visual domain. It needed myself to come to the conclusion at some point, there is no one who can say to me that I can't do it. And this is was a very simple thing to suddenly realize. No, the only person who can decide if I work with visual things or not is me. So if I believe I can do it, I just should do it. And at this time there was already a lot of friends and people I knew out there who did amazing stuff with video. And I know enough about the years of work they put into their work and all the experience that went into this to decide for myself that it is pointless that I try to compete with those. I just didn't assume that I could contribute anything to the world of visual arts or digital audiovisual arts with the medium video, simply because I saw so much amazing stuff and I knew that I'm lacking the technical skills and the experience to match that. And I decided I'd look at a different medium, simply to find a different way to express myself that is a bit more open territory. And oh yeah, and I worked on interface design for a software company. So at some point I decided to work with lasers. And when you think about laser, then there's probably two associations. I mean, nowadays it changed a little bit because more artists are working with it. When I started, I think 8-9 years ago, there was not so many people, which had to do with the fact that laser technology became much more accessible and cheaper. So laser, there's basically these two associations. There's the James Bond one. This is a laser. This is a person. And this is not a laser I would recommend in a club setting. This is one of those machines which you use to create thermonuclear fusion, and this is obviously very powerful and also out of my budget. No, this is a laser system at, good question, I think it's at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab. And so this is the one scenario, the James Bond evil beam scenario. And the other scenario is, this is the result of an early Google search for laser show. And we've seen all these things. And so there is a certain cheesiness to this. There's a certain, oh yeah, we can have green beams of light which are kind of moving around to the Goa ray notion of things. None of that was in any way appealing to me, especially not something like that, which for me shows everything that is wrong with laser display. So the way how lasers work is, it's a very primitive medium. You have a single beam of light, just like on a laser pointer, and you have two mirrors, and you move this beam of light around, and you try to do something meaningful with that. So first of all, unless you are really smart and you have the best possible hardware available, you always get these not so nice corners. Second of all, the most commercial laser show systems coming from a completely different idea of what people want to do with lasers than what I would be interested in. So the result of such things is they take a photo or a drawing and they just mark those points here by hand, and then they recreate this. And what is wrong with this thing, apart from the fact that it's super imprecise, is the choice of colors is completely arbitrary. Nothing there radiates artistic genius. It just radiates, yeah, I can use a laser to draw an animal. And as a matter of fact, and here you see some technical problem that the red beam is slightly different than the green beam. So if you see something like this, your reaction could be to say, okay, this is a boring medium, you can't do anything meaningful with it. Or your reaction could be, this is potentially interesting, and no one does something cool with it. And this was my reaction. And I threw all my naivety on the project. Just like a little boy saying, okay, I start from scratch. I have no idea exactly how far I can push this. I have no idea what I can really do with it. I just start. And all I knew was that I can do something else. That was clear to me, because I understood enough of the technical background to get an idea that there is different possibilities. And then I skipped a period of time where I was trying to find the correct laser system to work with. And then I had really good luck. I found a company in Berlin, 10 minutes by bike from where I live, who is building state-of-the-art show laser systems, and where the CEO of the company is always interested in people who are pushing his machines to the absolute limit. So two people found each other, and with his help I was able to really push my work towards what I'm doing now. So if you work with lasers, I'm getting a little bit technical, but I will leave it, don't worry. And I promise there will be no mathematical things here, maybe. So if you want to have a full color laser where you can draw in all possible colors, you take 3 different sources of laser light: a green laser, a red laser, and a blue laser, and there's some fancy semi-transparent mirrors which pass the light in one direction and reflect in another direction, and you can combine the red and the green to get a yellow beam, which of course is still a red and a green beam, but your eyes believe it's yellow. And then you combine it with a blue beam, and if you combine the blue and the yellow, your brain believes it's white, because all your receptors get some data, and then you have a white beam of light. And then you have these 2 mirrors. So fancy laser source looks like this. Fancy mirrors look like this. These mirrors are this size, and they are at the end of a laser projector, and those mirrors are responsible for actually drawing with the laser. And I say drawing because it is really the same as drawing by hand. And this is how a really nice laser system looks. So here's the little mirrors, here's the laser sources, and there's all the electronics around. Drawing so if the mirrors are not moving, I just got a single beam of light. Very intense, potentially quite dangerous beam of light. Light where you can easily lit up a cigarette, and there's this joke amongst the laser people: don't stare in the beam with the remaining eye. So this is a lot of power coming out here. But normally, this power is used to draw large things, and then all the power is distributed over a large surface, and then things are different. So, how do you draw with that? If I want to draw a line, I simply need to move one mirror back and forth. So if one mirror moves back and forth, and I do this fast enough, your eyes can't follow, and you see a line. If you move 2 mirrors, one with a sine wave and the other one with a cosine wave, you get a circle. So if you draw this circle, let's say more than 20 times per second, your eyes just see a circle. If you draw it very slow, you see one dot moving around. So it's easy to draw a circle with lasers, and circles with lasers look really beautiful. I love circles with lasers. So how do we draw 2 circles with one laser? That's the interesting thing, and this shows you how difficult the medium is. because you can't just, with video, you can copy the code. And you draw one circle, and then you draw another circle, and then you make a loop, and you say, draw 10,000 circles. 10,000 circles, no big deal. With lasers, it's different. You draw the first circle. When the circle is finished, you turn the laser beam off. Then you move the mirror in darkness to position it the second circle. Then you turn the laser back on, you draw the second circle. Then you turn the laser off, you go back to the first circle. So the sequence necessary to draw two circles at arbitrary position and size with a laser is already much more complicated than drawing one circle. And since it's all mechanical, the complexity is very limited. If I want to, doing nothing else than just having, let's say, 16 dots of light, that means 16 times I turn the laser on, I turn it off, I move it, I turn it on, turn it off, I move it, and I need to do this 20 times or more per second to get nothing else but these 15 moving dots, or 16. And actually, having a laser which with high precision does nothing but the 16 dots is already a challenge. So when you see my Phosphor installation, there you have 16 dots moving, and this is pretty much the maximum that you can do. And how on earth can you do something interesting with such a limited technology? That's exactly the question I found interesting. And there's two answers to this. First of all, if something is very limited, you need to focus on other domains that are important for your art. And in this case, we're talking about time. There's famous pieces like Steve Reich's clapping. That's two people doing this. So the sound generation is super simple. It's clapping. What makes this piece so amazing is the fact that the rhythm is complicated and two people are performing it. So you focus, if you work with lasers, you can't focus on making fantastic light gradients, but you focus on structure over time. And in a funny way, this is exactly what is at the core of composition. You deal with time. And in this way, I found that working with lasers is not different at all from writing a piece of music, because I'm facing the same problems. How long can I repeat something? What is the succession of elements? When is it important to get quiet equals dark? When does it need to be large? Those kinds of things. You talk about time, you talk about proportion, you talk about color. And that meant that with my composer's mindset, or electronic musician's mindset at least, I could start right into working with lasers because the formal ideas were very similar. The next thing is, since I do not need to display a perfect BMW logo or whatever, I can also work with the limits and the specific problems of technology. So, what does this mean? If I demand the laser to draw faster than it can draw, it makes errors. And these errors can be really interesting. So a simple example for such an error is, let's assume you want to draw a square. So a square means you run in one direction, then you stop, then you run in the other direction, then you stop, then you run in the other direction. In theory, you have to, okay, there's two challenges here. So if you just run with a constant speed, then you go from running at full speed to full stop. So imagine yourself running at full speed, and someone says, stop. You can't stop immediately. So in either case, you're running a little bit too far, and then you turn back. Or if you know before that here is a wall, you slow down, because you don't want to hit the wall. And this means that if you use a laser system to draw a square, you get either really, really bad at corners, or with a really good laser system, you get round corners. So this is a simple example where the technology already imposes an aesthetic. You demand something from the technology says, I can't do this, but I can do something else. And if you try to do more complex shapes, the technology interacts with it in ways that might be problematic or might be helpful. And let's see if I have. This is an early example of a test I did. This happens if you have no clue and you just are adventurous. What I wanted to do is I wanted to draw random green circles. Like, here's a matrix, here's an X, here's positions. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 positions here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is an 8 to 4 grid, and I wanted to randomly have these little green circles showing up. And I didn't understand when I made this test, this was on my first or second day working with lasers, I didn't understand yet that the laser beam needs time. So you see this is here, when I force the laser beam to finish this circle and go to this circle. And sometimes it needs so much time that the circle is not even half a circle. So, and here I try to go from this circle to this one, and you see this nice curve here. Later I learned how to make such things happen in clever ways. Here's another example where the behavior of the laser starts to get interesting by itself. For those who are into sound synthesis, this is the visual equivalent to a resonating low-pass filter. So I move with the laser in one direction, and then I stop it, and the laser beam does this, and it does it in 2 dimensions, and as a result I get these beautiful spirals. I never used this actually in installation, but when I look at this, I think I should. The beautiful thing is that the stuff the lasers do, you can also simulate on an oscilloscope. So there's ways to work with lasers even without having a large space, which was important to me when I started, because I didn't have a large workspace. And so I started to explore further what I can do. And this here is an example which I find important, because here the artifacts of the laser are actually working in favor of the overall experience. So here I draw the circles, and they're much better than the old circles, but we still have these fantastic lines here, which are just the way the laser moves to go from one circle to the other circle. And the reason why these lines are much less bright is because these lines are moving incredibly fast. Because they should take no time in theory, and these are drawing at normal speed. So you get this really bright circles, and you get this kind of faint lines in between. And this brought me to this is an illusion. This happens if you take a long exposure of some drawings, and then you see much more than the human eye. But this brought me to the idea for my first installation. And the first installation happened to be right here in Nantes in 2012. And so let's watch a quick video if I find it. So what you can see here is that you have these horizontal and vertical lines. This is the things I really programmed. And then you have the curved lines, which are just the result of me trying to do something that the lasers can't do. So all these lines here are not the result of programming, but the result of playing with the way the laser works. Yeah.
There is only one beam of laser.
This is 4. I come to this now. It's a good question. So you couldn't reach this type of complexity with only one pair of mirrors. So this is 4. And you notice this black shadow. And black shadow is an interesting thing because it was never intended at the beginning to use this black shadow in the installation. What I wanted to do is I wanted to achieve something where even if this is 4 different lasers, it convincingly looks like one shape. And this is a bit of a technical problem, and I had an idea how to do this. And as a test, if all these 4 laser beams behave the way I wanted, I thought I'd try some very basic test case where I'm just using a black signal which goes from one side to the other. So this was a test signal. This was only intended to be there as long as I tested it. So I set it up and I tested it, and at the beginning the black shadow was here, and it was at the same time here, and it jumped, and then it was here, until I got the synchronization right, and the shadow moved through the way you just saw it. And there was no sound yet, nothing. It was just the visual things happening. And
Sorry.
yeah.
Is for laser beam, or you have only one code for the whole thing?
Yes.
Only one program for the whole thing?
Yes. It's one max patch which controls all these things. And so I turned the black thing off because my job was done. It's in sync, it's all good. And then I noticed that the black thing is really important because it gave the sensation of a certain depth. The black thing was in front of it. And this happens to me very often, or probably to every artist. You try something, and the way it works is you try, and you observe, and then you think, and then you try again. So what happened here is I tried, and then I observed the behavior, and then I was thinking about it. Why did I like it? What is interesting with it? And then I came to conclusions how to put it in my work. And I immediately thought that this black feels like it has a mass, like it is a physical thing, which of course is the opposite. It's the lack of light, but still it feels like a big black thing which is a body of something. And so I decided to use an 8-channel sound system with this installation and have this black thing associated with this sound, like a big blade of a windmill. And I also did something that in the stereo version you don't notice. There's all these little high-pitched sounds going on, and you know that when you walk in front of a loudspeaker, that you cut the high frequencies for the other people. So if someone is in front of the loudspeaker, suddenly the high frequencies are gone, just if I talk in this direction. And so what happens in the installation is when the black shadow moves, it makes this dark sound, this low, noisy sound, and it also mutes the high frequencies. So it's quite convincing that this has a physical mass. And I like this idea that the thing which is not present, it is far bigger, far more powerful than the things which are present. And the rest was basically a fine-tuning of the behavior, like having these very fast movements going on at some point, and playing with the brightness and everything that plays a role here. Stop this in a right moment. And this brings me to another topic I find very interesting in my work, and this is the topic of time. When you watch a movie, or when you're listening to a piece of music, you have a fixed duration. The composer or the director made a decision about what happens when. Usually, you can assume you don't move. So you're just sitting like you're sitting here now, and you watch or listen. so that the space is static, but the time flows in a predefined manner. If you go to a museum and you watch a sculpture, the sculpture doesn't change over time. It's just this lump of metal, wood, plastic, whatever. But your position changes because you can walk around it. And if it's a beautiful piece of sculpture, it is rewarding to walk around it and to step back and get closer and to observe it from different angles. The interesting thing about the pieces of art we can do these days is we have both. We have the possibility that you can change your position, and you have the possibility, obviously, to work with time. But there is a problem here. Most media art from the 20th century and still a lot of media art from the 21st century is not real time. And what this means is it is in fact a loop. And the loop is a very, very strange concept for installation. Because what happens is the following. So the artist decided, okay, this piece is 12 minutes long, and it runs as a loop. You enter the museum, and it is very unlikely, well, actually, if you think correctly, it's completely impossible that you arrive exactly at the beginning. You will always arrive in the middle of the loop. And what happens then is you watch this piece, or you listen to this piece, and something in your brain waits for the repetition because you want to understand when it's finished. So let's assume the video has something that is kind of remarkable. At some point there's this orange glow, and you watch it and it's kind of nice, yeah? And then you see the orange glow. Oh yeah, I've seen the orange glow before, and you walk out. And there's nothing you can do against this. This is just how we work. We think we've seen it, all we go. And only if it's super interesting, you stay for 2 or 3 repetitions. But you always have the feeling of, here's a repetition. And the next thing is, you try to figure out where actually the beginning was. Because unless you display just white noise, there is of course some sort of narration going on. And if it's a loop, you try to figure out where is the intentional starting point? What's the narrative? What's the story behind it? And the story, of course, has a beginning and an end. It's not that you fall in love in the middle of it, you're in this crazy love relationship, then you go through the breakup, and then there's this moment nothing happens, and then you meet the same person again and fall in love, and then it stops right before it's getting interesting. That's wrong. So you clearly know that, okay, you meet the person, you fall in love, and then you break up. So your brain tries to make sense of it. And the beauty of the work I can do these days with my computers is there is no fixed duration, there is no loop. Everything in these installations is defined by controlled random operations in different time scales. So you have things that change every millisecond. You have things that change every few seconds. You have things that change over the course of half an hour. You have things that change over the course of 2 hours, of a day, of a week. And all these things are connected with each other and are related to each other, which means at the end, I can never tell you how the installation will behave at any given moment. I only know how it could behave. So in this case, for instance, you have these moments where these things are really bright and sparkling. And of course, I programmed that this can happen, but I didn't program that this happens at this very moment when this person is standing there. I just programmed that this might happen every 40 minutes, but sometimes also every 10 minutes. And a big part of the process of creating this sculpture in time is shaping these ratios. So I spent a lot of time just sitting in the museum with my laptop and watching these things and fine-tuning them. So does this happen too often? Does this need to happen more often? Is this moving too fast? Is this moving too slow? So instead of sculpturing a shape, I sculpture a shape in time. So a normal sculpture would walk around the sculpture and would think, is the proportion fine? And I basically sit there and walk around time and see if the proportion in time is fine. And this can go on forever because it's never perfect. And I spent, I think, 5, 6, 7 hours at the Phosphor installation at the castle to get the behavior right so that in this specific room it feels as good as it can get. And I'm kind of semi-happy with it. So, we talked about production, we talked about rhythm versus loop. Actually, I'd like to talk about loops in music a little bit as a kind of a side concept, because obviously I'm interested in loop-based music, and that seems to be a contradiction. The point is the idea that a one-bar loop is boring and doesn't change is a very Western concert hall idea, because it omits a few points that are important for the perception of dance music. And the reason why I mention this in this context is because I perceive the creation of dance music pretty much like a sculpturing process. I create an object that is placed in a room. So the object I create is the track, and the museum is the club. And people, just like in a museum, are walking around my music, either by dancing, or by going to the bar and coming back in, or by interacting with other people and at some point listen to the music and then go away, or by moving through different points in the room where the sound is different. So, whilst this is a one-bar loop in theory, in the practical perception, it is a whole narrative. And this is why it actually works to listen to, let's say, techno for a whole night. Because even if the changes in the music are relatively small compared to the changes you would expect in a concert piece, the overall stimulation you get in your brain is far more than just this loop. It is your social interaction, it is the change of the perception of time if you expose yourself to the same stimulation again and again. So, for me, working in this domain and working on club music is totally working on the same ideas. They just require different work methods, but the things I'm interested in are very, very similar. It is always about talking about space, it's always talking about time, and about the interaction between something I do and the audience. And all the things I learn from music I can apply to this, and all the things I learn when I observe audiences reacting to this, I can apply back to the way I create music. And on top of this, of course, I'm using the same tools. As someone who's programming, writing something that makes a sound or making something that moves a laser is the same type of technical process. So I don't even need to change my work skills that much. So it's all pretty much the same. I'd like to show, just as a teaser, a video of I'd like to briefly show you another piece that is a classical happy accident. We talked about that you do something and then you observe something. I had a very, very small workspace, and I work with powerful lasers, and I learned to respect them because I burned several holes in furniture. So the last thing you want is this laser beam in your eye. So I had my work desk with my computer and the laser here and the projection wall there, and I thought, if I make a mistake, the laser beam could actually easily go right here where I'm sitting. Okay, let's do something against it. And I looked around and I found a piece of black plexiglass. And I thought, okay, this is cool. I mounted on a stand and I put it there. And then I thought, okay, I can't see the laser, so the laser can't see me, so I'm safe. And then I thought, black plastic, powerful laser beam. That might be a problem. So what do? You try it out. So I put the laser at full power and I had just one beam hitting the black plexiglass, and the result was this, pretty much after a few seconds. A nice hole in the plexiglass and the laser beam going right through. So I decided, perhaps as a protection thing, this is a stupid idea. But something else also happened. On the opposite wall, I saw this. And let me explain how this works. So this black sheet of plexiglass, let's see if I find the other one, which is, yeah. So this is a black sheet of plexiglass, and it reflects, we measured it, I think 3% of the light, which doesn't seem very much, but in a dark room with a powerful laser, it's enough. If it reflects 3% of the light on this black shiny surface, it also means 97% of the light are turned into heat, and this is why it melts. And you can see here, the shadow here of the laser beam is already a little bit crumbled. Maybe we can go back one image. Can I go back? Who programmed this website? It was me. So yeah. So here you see the laser beam. I made a circuit so that the energy is not as destructive as it would be when only one beam. And here the plexiglass melted. And by melting it, it becomes kind of this broken surface, like water waves, depending on the exact heat at this point and the exact behavior of the laser beam and all kinds of things you can't influence. And as a result, you don't get a perfect mirror anymore, but you get the equivalent of a water surface. And the result is exactly the same, just as the things you see from a water surface, you just see on the wall. So the plexiglass constantly changes. And if you use the right amount of energy and the right timing for how you move the laser beam and the right colors, you can get really, really beautiful things going on that are completely unpredictable and that you could not do with, to model something like this in a computer would be very difficult. And so one of the most beautiful results was this one here. This is really just the reflection from this plexiglass plate. You get these things if the heat is very high and it expands very fast. So you have to imagine that this thing here, unfortunately, I never managed to make a really good video. So, but you have to imagine that this one here is just exploding a little bit with this heat. And here in the middle, it's so big that there's little bubbles on the plexiglass, so that this starts to do this. And you really observe, like in a microscope, on a large projection surface, you observe these changes on this tiny plexiglass plate. And this was a great example of discovering something really cool by accident. And in an ironic way, the work I put in this installation was maybe 10% of what I put in every other laser installation. But this is by far the most successful one. So there is no relationship between the amount of work we put into something and the perceived quality, or at least the perceived, or the, not perceived, but the economic success of something. And sometimes you can have just good luck. So let's go to Phosphor. beginning, when I was working on it, this is a piece I put a lot of work and effort in to get it where I want it to be. One part that was quite difficult was the sound. I didn't think that I could do an installation without sound because I do audio-visual installations, so per definition there has to be sound. And I tried a lot of things. And none of the things I tried I found really convincing. But at some point I made a decision and I say, okay, this type of sounds kind of work. And the reason why I always wanted to have sound is because in a museum, when you enter a room, I want people to really feel that they are in my room. So I kind of want to block the outside world, and sound is a great way to do this. You enter a room and there's a certain sound, and this is just like a perfume, a sonic perfume. You are in a different space because of the sound. But still, I was not 100% convinced by the sound. And so on the day before the opening, there was a sound running, and the piece was running, and a artist whose work I also very much admire came in, and I didn't know him personally, I only knew his work. And he looked at the work and said something like, wow, I really like it, this is super cool, but you don't need the sound. And this was kind of, damn, because it hit exactly my feeling of something is wrong with the sound. And then the artist, who is kind of a hero too much, but someone whose work I admire, tells me that there is no sound. So I said to him, so you think it's enough without sound and I can just turn the sound off? He said, yeah. So I ran back to the computer and turned off the sound. And then I went back into the main room with the artwork. And he just stood there and looked at me and said, much better. And then I stood next to him for 10 minutes. And because I tried to argue with him, yeah, it's better. So at the end, I decided it has no sound, and so it has no sound. And again, it was in a weird way a liberation, because again I did something that I perceived was necessary, because tradition, because of the way you do it. And then someone with an open mind, who comes from the outside and doesn't know how much I did struggle with the sound, just says, turn it off. And I love those moments, because these are the moments where you learn something which you didn't expect. And so this is the first installation I made, which is a pure visual installation, which for me, coming from my background as not an artist, only a sound artist, an audiovisual artist, is again another step. So suddenly I do a work where I say, you don't need to understand that I did something with sound. This is a visual work. So what is it about? The thing with lasers is you can't draw complex things, because, well, I explained you why. But if I make photos of laser work, then I basically collect over time all these movements. And suddenly you get much more complexity. If you think back about this here, where is it? Yeah. So this is a long-term exposure, maybe 30 seconds or something like this. So all the things I did draw with the laser are just on one image. And this, of course, creates much more complexity than what the human eye can see. And in a way, I do the same thing here. And the trick is I use phosphorescent paint. So what phosphorescent paint does is it's this kind of afterglow, night glow paint. The same stuff which is if you have a nice old watch which makes your things glow in the dark, or the airplane on the ground, this kind of greenish shimmering stuff. And I use an ultraviolet laser beam to just draw on this powder. So on the floor in the castle there's just paint powder, and I use these 16 laser beams to draw. And by doing so, I can create something that is far, far more complex than what I can do just with the laser. But I'm still using the same medium. And this piece took me a lot of time to develop, because to find the right algorithm that does these shapes here in a satisfying way turned out to be really complicated. And the irony is that I spent a month or so to solve a specific problem, which at the end I didn't even use because I made a programming mistake. And it still looks good. So the concept behind it was this idea that I have it's a square piece on the floor, and my idea was that I have a virtual mount range, and that each laser beam is a drop of water, which I place at a position, and then I look from this position, what's the best way to go down to the valley, and then I move the laser beam. So you can clearly see here's a lot of beams that all end up down here. So this is the river, and here's the valley. So there's a force which moves these laser beams down here. So even if they start here or here or here, if they start here, it's interesting because they might go into this river, or they might go into this river. And so you get these surfaces which in a way resemble a very abstract version of this kind of landscape of rivers watched from above. I've got something important. Well, the mathematical model behind it is not very good. So if you watch it very carefully, you will notice that there's some things going on that are impossible. Sometimes rivers are floating in a circle. That's a bit too much of magic. But it can be explained by rounding errors and stuff like this. On top of it, what I do is sometimes I play a bit God, which means I do things that are completely out of the model. I randomly move the beam around, and this just creates interesting shapes that have nothing to do with any theory. And this is the freedom as an artist which I take. I say, it looks good, so I do it. So I combine something that is very serious and where a lot of conceptual thoughts went into it with something that is purely done because I like it. And I mean, you will observe this in real because it's much nicer. I have to admit, on the video, this is almost white, and in practice, it's pure green. There is no white pigment that is glowing long enough that you don't need all these texts here. And since you actually see the installation, you don't need to see it here. So the phosphor disappears over maybe 2 hours. So what you see is the darkest things here are 2 hours old. So you kind of get this this vision in time over 2 hours. Just like if you think about you in a desert or a canyon. In the canyon, when you see the stones, the walls of the canyon, and you see the history. So you see the history here too, but this history disappears after 2 hours. And well, I'm quite happy with this one. I still would work ideally more on the exact code that creates the movements, because it could be still better. But within the code which is running now, I believe I achieved the best it can do, and it looks cool. As a last topic which I wanted to talk about, only briefly because we're running a bit out of time, is there's two topics I want to touch briefly. The first topic is the topic of meaning, and the second is the topic of how important is it to use high tech. The topic of meaning, obviously my work in music has no lyrics, so it's not easy to derive a simple message from my pieces. And obviously those pieces are abstract. And so what does it mean? You know, there's a classical question. What does your work mean? And the answer for me is I'm interested in processes, and I'm interested in a certain amount of emotional, certain type of emotional states. But I find it actually very important in my work that it is open. It is just as open as abstract sculptures are open. You see something like this, and you have associations, and all these associations are valid. But it's not important that the associations of the person seeing or hearing the work are the same ones as I have. I'm more interested in, does it feel right? So my idea of meaning is that the meaning is not important. What is important is the proportion, the behavior, the shape. So I have a very abstract concept of beauty going on here, which I try to fulfill with every single work. I wanted the work at the end is beautiful. Whatever beautiful means. I have no clear definition of beautiful. It's something totally personal. If I feel comfortable watching it for a long time, and it excites me to watch it or listen to it, then my job is done. This is the only criteria I really can apply. And I can, of course, apply criteria that come from the idea of proportion, of shape, of timing, but there is no deeper meaning. So I have an idea when I do it. Like my model behind this was this river model. But of course, if you watch this, and I noticed yesterday when I'm observing it, you can also think this is cars at night on a mountain street with their car lights. Makes total sense. You can think of little creatures moving around in deep sleep. All these things are totally valid. And it's important for me that I don't say, no, you can't see it like this because it's obviously a quantum physical model of the n theta tree in the fifth dimension. It's not. And with all my works, I have an association, a meaning, but I'm happy if other people have different associations. And I find it even very difficult to write texts about it, because everything I have to say is in this work. I can talk about how it's done, I can talk what it's doing technically, but if you ask me what it is meaning-wise, it becomes difficult. And this is deliberately so. The very last thing is how important is it to use the latest technology? And this is an interesting question if you think about the fact that there are so many advances in virtual reality, in higher resolutions. If you are a video artist and suddenly you have 8K and 3D available and you can do it in real time, and if you can have LED screens that you can afford, or a festival can afford, or a gallery that cover the whole room, you can of course create something that is far more immersive, far more impressive than what people could create 10 years ago. So if you look at the present and the future, then you would always say, yeah, I need the latest technology, I need the fastest computer, I need as much equipment as I can have. But if you look in the past and you try to evaluate which pieces of art are important for you, or in general are perceived as important, then you notice that the quality is decoupled, or in the cases of a lot of very important artworks, the quality is decoupled from the contemporary technology. You can enjoy and appreciate a work of art even if it's technically obviously outdated. Now, a nice example would be you watch a Fellini movie, a black and white movie, which is 50 years old. So it's black and white. The sound is mono. It has a low resolution. It has a lot of grain. So a lot of the aspects that, if you would compare it with like Gravity and Dolby Atmos 3D, you could say it's completely outdated. It's yesterday's art. But there's no question that this movie is, or that the oeuvre of this movie director is essential. And it will be essential in a few hundred years, because what he tells is important. And the fact that the technology was how it was is part of the color of the aesthetic. And or there's a very vital interest these days in early computer art. So if you look at very early computer plots from people like Manfred Mohr, early computer graphics pioneer. This is stunningly beautiful stuff. It's very simple. It's ridiculously simple. Everyone can program this in 10 minutes nowadays, if you look at the result. But the point is, Manfred Mohr did it 60 or 70 years ago. And with the knowledge that this is done in this time, you look at it and you think, this is insane. This is fantastic. This is the foundations of a lot of the stuff we do these days. So, I'm talking about this because I found it important for myself to understand that as much as I use technology, the beauty and the urge to create is decoupled from these things. And I do not need to run after every new development all the time in order to create something that is artistically meaningful. And I have much more peace of mind since I discovered that I can refrain from that. I can still explore a medium which I know inside out, and can work with this medium even if technology goes much further. So a relevant question in my field would be, am I interested in augmented reality or virtual reality? And the answer is yes, I'm totally interested. But should I, as an artist, invest in it? No, I shouldn't, because I'm not nearly finished with working in this field. So I'm happy to see what other people do with the contemporary technologies. But from my perspective, the deeper I dive into the things I already know, the more I discover. And instead of doing something very primitive and basic in a new medium, I like to go very deep into understanding the possibilities of the medium I know. And I think this is a nice end statement. And I would like to open it up for questions.
Est-ce que vous avez des questions maintenant pour 3-4 questions?
It's definitely on.
Okay. I just have a question about the sound on the fragile territories. How the sound is linked on it? Because you always think. How do you think the sound on it? Because you talk about loops.
You mean the sound on fragile territories?
Yes.
Is Well, the sound there is not a loop. The sound is connected to the process which creates the image over there. So we have the image here. There is a few layers of sound on this one. The obvious layer was the swoosh, which is really synchronized to the movement. The second layer of sound is that I want to have something that gives this visual thing here a physical plausibility. So it's a bit of a movie sound design thinking. So you see these things and you think, this needs to have this high frequency going on, which of course works very nicely with the shadow. So it's the second layer. And the third layer is, which I perhaps these days would do differently, is this long progression of harmonic drones that are also a bit informed by the things going on. So it's several layers that are connected, and each layers have their own life, and some of them are extremely synced to what you see, and some of them are just free floating below it. And so the main goal is that maybe it's important. What I've noticed about synchronization is interesting. I did a lot of club or festival electronic live stuff with Tariq Bari, amazing visual artist. And at the beginning, we thought it's very important that every musical element has to be really synchronized with the sound, with the visual things. So we set up a complicated technical structure where I sent data to his computer, and the result was very boring. Because, you hear a bass drum and you see something flickering. And this is nice for a bar. Bang once, bang two, bang three, bang four. After 2 bars, you think, okay, I know this. And at some point, we decided to completely give up the idea of synchronization and just have Tariq respond to what he's hearing. And the funny thing was, when we did this, people approached us after the concert and said, how did you get this amazing synchronicity? And the fact was, well, by just playing with it. And I like this idea that sound has its own life and is only vaguely connected to the visual things. Does this answer the question? Yes. Cool.
Yeah, I have a question. Like, as an artist, when sometimes you feel like blood and you have like a creative crisis and you don't know where to go, like, what do you have like methods to get out of there? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do you find a new path to continue the exploration? Or
okay, this is a super interesting question about the writer's block problem. Unfortunately, this happens mostly in situations where you have a deadline. So, when there's a lot of external pressure and you have to deliver, then it's most likely that you run into a situation where you feel, I can't. And sometimes I have sleepless nights about this, when I feel I need to finish something and it's not getting any good. And I don't know where to continue. I don't have a really good answer. I just, I think I do what every artist does. A mix of procrastination and just trying to fight through. So, if I'm completely blocked and nothing works, I do something else. I go out and ride my bike, or I spend too much time reading completely pointless Facebook threads, and then I go back to work and I try to achieve something. And the closer the deadline gets, at some point I switch to automatic mode. And automatic mode is, okay, I don't feel what I'm doing, I don't understand why I do this, I just do a recipe. So, like, okay, okay, this is a piece for, let's say I need to prepare a live set for a club, and I'm not motivated. Okay, I just act like a robot on the things I know. Okay, we need a bass drum here, we need this element here, we need this element here. Okay, does it work? Good, next step. Without the intention to create art, just with the intention to do something that works. This is of course not satisfying, but it's better than delivering nothing. And then you always have the hope that some magic happens. And most of the time, and this is the great advantage of doing something for a long time, at least you get skilled in what you're doing, which means even if the inspiration is not there, you can still rely on your ears breaking. You just repeat what you've done before. And sometimes it's enough to do this because no one notices, and sometimes in the process of doing so you discover something else. But
so when you were talking about this mistake of the laser burning the and that was your most beautiful piece inside, you say, well, it was by love, but it's not just by all the process you've done before.
Yeah, I think the point is a very important part of being an artist is, and a very difficult one if you work alone, you need to have distance from what you do. And sometimes the distance comes from, you ask friends, and your friends say, this is great, this is bad. Sometimes distance comes from, you go out and have a drink and come back next morning. And sometimes distance comes from really going to a different place. So when I make music, I find it very important to perform live. Because as soon as I perform my pieces, I hear them differently. If I will start playing something right in front of you, the very moment I play it, I listen to it in a different mental state than how I would listen to it in my studio. Because I kind of observe your reactions. And no one needs to tell me that this element is too loud. I notice immediately. And so what I do if I'm completely lost sometimes is, and this is dangerous, of course, I ask other people. So when I don't know exactly if this is a good way to go or this is a good way, then I talk to good friends and say, let's have a drink. And what do you think of this? I want to do this, but I have a problem here. Or I do this, but then I can't do that. What would you do? And very often I do then the opposite of what they tell me. But still you have this interaction. The big problem with electronic arts is that you can work alone. Things are so much easier if you work with other people, because you avoid obvious mistakes. If you work on music and you focus on a certain sound, you completely forget about correct mixing. And if you would work together, someone else would adjust the mix while you do your own things. Or would say, this sound is boring, this needs to be off. But I like it, it's boring. Okay. You have interaction. And with computers alone, you have no interaction. And I find this the most difficult part. So I believe working alone takes far more discipline and also more time than if you work together with other people. But on the other side, you gain a lot of time because you don't have discussions. So, but I have no good recipe for overcoming these situations. What I do know is that the price for working as an artist is that you deal with a lot of doubt. I mean, every artist I know who is open enough to talk with me about things tells me that they have struggling with the same things, that they are insecure about their work, that they are not sure if what they do is important, that they are not sure if the current development they are making is right, they are not sure if they focus on the right things. So if I compare creating art with, for instance, my work at Ableton, the work at Ableton is beautiful in such a way that there's a problem I can solve. And afterwards, I can just make a check mark and say, okay, we solved. What problem do you solve with an installation? Now, when is it finished? If I need to write a computer program that calculates the sum of 5 numbers, there's a very clear task. You put 5 numbers in, and number 6 comes out. And you know exactly when it's finished. It's finished when it works, and you type in the numbers, and you see the result. When is this finished? Who can tell you when this is finished? That's a big problem. When is a piece of music finished? When is an installation finished? When is a painting finished? You can always change it. You can always paint over. You can always make this. I can watch this and I can say, oh, it's all great, but the density is high. It needs to be spaced wider. Then it's spaced wider, and I look at it from the back and I think, now it's kind of falling apart in the middle. Let's do something else. And I can go in a circle forever. And this is why deadlines are important. Because if you have an opening in a week, you learn that at some point, once I made it like this, and if I made it like this 2 days ago, I had a reason for it. So I'm not questioning everything. This is maybe a good trick. If you came up with an idea, trust your idea. Trust your idea even after 2 days. Just think, this is not your idea, this is an idea from someone else, and you have to be really careful not to destroy it. But it's of course easier to say than to do. Okay, I'm talking myself.
We have time for one last question.
I'm just curious about who the artist who told you to cut the music from the installation.
Ulf from Granular Synthesis. And Ulf is one of these people who is very outspoken and verbal about things. So, which I like as someone to interact with. So, Ulf just said, er braucht keine Musik. And I appreciated this because, we didn't know each other. But he was just he had his opinion, and he's one of those people who, if he has an opinion, he states it. And yeah. I appreciate this. I appreciate this much more than people who say, oh, the sound is fantastic. And then they leave the room and they think, God, this was an Henke guy. The sound is so horrible. This one I hate. I'd rather be outspoken and say, okay. Yeah. I guess we have time for one last question. Because the answer was too short. One more. Okay, good.
So that's it.
No, thank you very much.